Hi, folks. This is Dr. Rob Sivas, the Carb Addiction Doc. And today I'm going to speak about something that is not related to carbohydrate addiction or food or nutrition or anything like that, but it's extremely close to my heart. And I want you to go on a journey with me. Under COVID restrictions, we're not traveling very much. So I'm going to take you on a trip of imagination. I'm going to take you back home. I'm going to take you to Africa, the most beautiful, spectacular continent, most misunderstood continent on earth right now. And I'm going to take you to the very bottom tip of Africa, my hometown, Cape Town. Oh my God, I haven't been there in a long time. Can't get there because of COVID. Can't go and visit my mom. But this story is a little bit about my dad who died in April. My dad was a professor of pediatric surgery at the University of Cape Town at a time when he was actually the first full-time pediatric surgeon on the entire continent of Africa. That means that he performed surgeries on children from newborns all the way through in Africa to 13 years of age. And in his appointment as the new professor of surgery, they built a new hospital. And it was called the Red Cross Children's War Memorial Hospital. So a lot of the soldiers after the Second World War contributed money and they raised money to pay for this hospital, the Red Cross Children's Hospital in Cape Town, South Africa, the very, very first freestanding children's hospital on the continent until just a few years ago. And my father was the first chief of pediatric surgery in South Africa at a time when this awful scourge of apartheid was running rampant through the country, and segregation was was what it was all about. And if you understand the Black Lives Matter movement here in America, magnify that, multiply that exponentially, and you've got what entrenched apartheid was all about. And this is in the 60s and the 70s when this system of segregation was just happening. And a little story, a little anecdote about my dad. He really, really cared about his patients. For him, the life of a child was sacrosanct. And, oh my God, the hours that he worked, the time that he spent, the work, the effort that he put in as a caring, compassionate, empathetic physician who cared for kids who couldn't care for themselves, irrespective of social standing, irrespective of color. But remember, this is apartheid, South Africa. And everything was segregated. Blacks over here, actually over here, and whites over here. An awful, awful, awful system. I was raised in that system. I benefited from that system. I benefited from that system because of this. Not because of this. Be that as it may, folks, I can't undo that history. But here's what my dad did. Obviously, South Africa has a very high component of non-white people, so-called black, so-called colored, so-called Indian, and then the white subgroups. That's how they were classified. That's how they were grouped. But the overwhelming majority are black Africans. So on any surgical ward, the overwhelming number of children are going to be representative of that community, and they're going to be black African kids. But they had the black wards and the white wards. And they had white staff and black staff. And they couldn't cross over. And the white ward always had just a few kids, and the black ward, because of the volume, was bursting at the seams. And my dad said, at the height of apartheid, where he could have been thrown in jail, he said, screw that. Let's mix them. Let's provide the best possible care we can possibly provide for every child in need, and let's be colorblind. Now, I know that sounds fairly simple in the modern era, but to do that in the face of an evolving apartheid system was so radical that he was taking his own life into his hands. But it happened. And where there was a bed, there was a kid that needed that bed. And it didn't matter what color, what ethnic origin, what social circumstance that came from. And my dad did that and took the risk of doing that. and stood behind his principles as a caregiver for children. It's kind of where children help out a little bit. And then on one particular day, he found that there was some staff, because you had the mix of patients, of colored patients, but you had white staff on the so-called white ward and black staff on the so-called black ward. And he said, no, I want the best staff taking care of my sickest patients. So he had the matron, the head nurse, assign her most experienced, best nurses to the sickest of his patients, because he cared about the kids more than he cared about the politics. Oh my God, can you believe it, folks, that there were black nurses and so-called colored nurses who were some of the most experienced nurses on that floor, some of the best nurses and caregivers on that floor? Can you believe that? How's that possible? Well, I'm being facetious, of course. So he said, integrate. And you know what the cool thing is? There was no uphill. There was no pushback from any of the nurses, from any of the people that were actually doing the clinical work. You know who pissed in his water? You know who condemned him and beat him up? Were the administration. The head of pediatrics, and he had an awful relationship at that time, particularly because of this colorblind nature on the surgical floor. And the administrative nurses, oh, you can't have this. But in those days, healthcare was very hierarchical, and unlike in America right now, where it's all non-medical administrators that are the shepherds, and we doctors are the sheep, we really don't have any power anymore. In those days, it was very much a pyramidal society, and the doctors and the professor was at the top. And they had an ironclad will, and he wielded that ironclad will and integrated both floors. So there was a unified surgical floor, and the best nurses, irrespective of color, were assigned to the sickest patients, irrespective of color. And shortly after he did that, there was a really sick baby that came in, and the baby happened to be the child of a very, very racist white farmer who I think had some degree, but you know what? He didn't have a degree, folks. He happened to be a minister in the government. So you got this white farmer who's a minister in the government, all powerful, this apartheid government, and his sick child is on the floor. And who gets assigned to him? The best nurse, who happened to be a little darker skinned. Oh, the tantrum that I need to call him. I remember being at home. I was a little kid, being at home, and my dad gets this phone call. And in those days, we didn't have even pages or anything. There were blue lights, and the cops came down the driveway and picked up my dad and took him straight into the hospital because the minister said at 9, 10 o'clock at night, he has to see my father. And that's what they did. Under emergencies, they came and picked him up at home several times, whether it was surgery or obviously this crisis of a black nurse looking after a white baby. My dad went into the hospital and he looked at this prominent minister and he said, "Sir, your child is very, very sick. This lady is my best nurse by far. And I can assure you that your child is going to get... I want a white nurse. I won't have a black nurse touching my... All right, sir. Take your baby. Go to the hospital down the road. Non-pediatric hospital. They've just got little pediatrics floors. Off you go. Or you can stay and have my best nurse give your child the best care that we as a team know how to give." And that child was destined to die. That child should not have lived. In those days, had a mortal condition. Child was as sick as snot. And that nurse came in and worked overtime, and she busted her ass and did everything she could. And the team of doctors and nurses did everything they could. And despite all the odds, that baby survived. And after weeks and I think it was almost a couple of months on the floor, slowly over time, that minister and his wife got to know the nurse as a human being, not as a black person, and realized that good humans are good humans irrespective of color. And the amazing thing is that that minister went back to Parliament and allowed and passed legislation to allow that surgical unit to be integrated when everything in the country was being segregated. And my father led that charge. I see BLM now in the 2020s, and I see what he did 60 years ago, 70 years ago, in the worst segregated country in the world that the world has probably ever seen, certainly in the modern era. And that was my father. And I just tell that story because I always tear up when I tell it. Because that was the best damn surgical unit in pediatric surgery that the world knew at that time. He specialized in doing conjoined twins, Siamese twins, babies that are conjoined. And that team had by far the great third world shithole Africa, as our president calls it. A shithole country. Had the most sophisticated surgical therapy to take care of conjoined twins because of those nurses, because of their excellence, because of their dedication to their patients, and because that team worked as a cohesive unit. And now, folks, as you'll see, please watch this video at the end of this story of this anecdote, because that hospital is struggling. Funds are tight in Africa. They still maintain a top-notch clinical skills unit that is integrated and famous the world round. There are doctors that trained in that unit that are professors all over the world at all the major hospitals in the world. I'm one of them. I trained there. I trained there not as a pediatric surgeon, but as a medical student and as a surgical resident. And Professor Alp Nomananglu, who's a good friend of mine, is now the chief of pediatric surgery in my father's position. And he's appealing for funds. He's appealing for funds to keep that unit going. They treat burns, they treat all surgical patients, irrespective of income. And I know that everybody's asking for money, but watch this video. And if you can spare a few dollars, let me know, or contact them directly. But the beautiful thing about South Africa is that $1 goes a long, long way with the currency over there. Fortunately, the currency's been devalued, but its buying power is great. So even a few dollars, a few less Starbucks Flappo Lappos, a few less bags of chips or tubs of ice cream to improve your health, got to throw the carb addiction part in there. Those few dollars will make a tremendous, dramatic difference in the shithole country that I love. See what you can do. And thank you for watching.
These are the unsung heroes of the Red Cross War Memorial Children's Hospital. Engaging on the front lines of daily battle, they care for, save lives, and ensure the future of our country's most valuable asset, our children.
The emergency centre is not an easy place to work. Sometimes it feels like a war zone.
Every day is different. Every day is unpredictable.
One night I was on call, I saw a gunshot in a small 2-year-old. We had a pit bull terrier who tore off a young boy's arm. And we had a shack fire where a young child actually died.
A blink, a second, it's life.
It can be terrifying, but it can also be very rewarding.
Kids are amazing. They bounce back incredibly.
They just have this magic that they bring to everyday and the ordinary life. an unsung hero. I don't think I'm a hero.
You're helping children. How can you be a hero in that situation?
I don't see myself as a hero.
We do this because we're dedicated to this hospital. We need to continue with this work.
With the help of funders, as well as the government, we can actually save kids' lives and make a difference. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
100% of your donations will go towards the Red Cross Children's Hospital Emergency Centre.
Folks, many years ago, my father started the Children's Hospital Trust for that Red Cross Children's Hospital that I described. And for a long time before his death, he headed up that trust. And he's got some great benefactors that have contributed. But we would so welcome your contributions in his name, Sidney Sivas. Google him, Professor Sidney Sivas, a great, great man who did so many things empathetically out of his heart. Not a wealthy man, at least financially, but wealthy in stories, in history, in lives touched. And that's the best kind of human being. And so many lives touched, of doctors that were legacies of him, of patients that he saved, of plants and flowers that he grew. But if you can contribute to the trust that he started, in his name, for the hospital, you'll be taking care of 6 surgical babies. Thanks so much.